Our world continues to change and push us in ways we have not been challenged before. On this show, we talk about these challenges, how to be aware of them, face them, and overcome them in your life. This is David Waldas, creator of the Aligned Living System.
And I'm Nick Musica, Aligned Living Coach. Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast.
Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast. This is David Waldas here with Nick Musica. Our topic today is something that Nick's been running into quite a bit lately, and I know I have in my life as well as bringing the aligned living work and all that I do. And it's about how our belief systems work. And the idea that we can have these experiences that are so clear and so real and so true. And then something that's like 5 degrees over from that, that's just as weird, that's just as out there, that's even connected, can feel completely untrue to us. But the experience we've had feels true because we've had it. Nick can go ahead and you can jump in and share really, because this is about people's conversation in plant medicine, right? What you've been running into with their belief systems.
Yeah. So quick background. I've been spending time with San Pedro, which is a psychedelic cactus since 2017.
Known as the grandfather.
Kind of
to ayahuasca, the jungle goddess, grandmother, right?
Yeah. And maybe for some people, and I've never spent time with it, peyote. Like people talk about peyote as the cactus, but this is another one. And I mean, I would consider it a friend. It's an ally for me. Like I have a really good relationship with that cactus.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk to folks, they're like, mushrooms, LSD, all the other things. And I'm like, I really don't know. I don't particularly understand mushrooms, never had any experience with ayahuasca. But like San Pedro, I like a lot. I mean, it's super helpful for me.
And when you say a relationship, you're talking about the consciousness of it, right? Like that there is, we call it the grandfather, it's very literal, right?
Absolutely.
And the difference between LSD and San Pedro is very different, because LSD is it opens the doors to perception, right? Like that's what it does. It lets you in, but it doesn't guide you. There's not a being connected with it that takes you there. It's something that was created in a lab.
Yeah.
And when we look at different things, like it's interesting, like I wouldn't touch mushrooms for me because they don't have a guide with them. They're very, like they take us into very fuzzy places. And to me that's just not that interesting, but San Pedro is very interesting at the right moment, at the right time.
Yeah. And I've made that mistake, what you're expressing here, when people say, so tell me about it. Like, how does it work? How does it go? And I'm like, well, there's a guide there. And like, what's their name? Who are they? And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I mean, there's a human there, because you're talking about a human. And so there are facilitators that will help you set the tone for the day, be with you if you get into some trouble.
Which is really important. Like they're holding a space too. And
Totally. Yeah. But what I was referring to was what you were talking about is there's a being there that you are interacting with. It's a call and answer type of time. You can ask a question, you get a response. Someone sends you something, you get to ask a question about it. I mean, it's very interactive. And to the point, I remember this one time where I was a little disappointed in not getting as much information as I wanted relative to some other times. And here's the thing that happens with animals and guides and with San Pedro is like you have a thought, and when you're in this space, you're communicating, right? It's just how it works. And I thought a little disappointed, and the response I got back, and I felt like such an asshole, was, is it not enough for us just to spend time with each other?
Yeah, interesting.
And I was like, shit, like, what a selfish prick I am.
You're actually in a relationship. Like you're sitting there. It'd be one thing if you're just sitting there by yourself going, I want more to happen. But when you're sitting there with somebody else and you look at them and go, is this all we're doing? We're just sitting here. We're just hanging out.
Yeah. Like call your best friend. And if they don't have something good to offer you, you're like, nah, I don't want to do it. Like, but don't you want to just want to hang out and just share the space, go for a walk, do a thing? No, it doesn't sound exciting. Right. Like that was sort of how I was being. And that correction, that really explicit recognition of there's a relationship here that I sort of knew, but I couldn't put into context like this without having that experience. Yeah. Like that, how it spoke up.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating, right? That's where actually where Nick and I met was at a San Pedro ceremony, and I've had a lot of experiences. I've never done ayahuasca, but I've had a lot of experiences with the being because I've had a lot of clients that have gone to do it, and I'll do like a pre-session with them about how do I get the most out of this? How do I prepare and really what's the mindset I want to be in? Like, where do I want to come from? Like, what am I opening up to? And, this didn't happen intentionally, but I had a client that was getting ready to go do this. And I said, well, let's open up to the space. And I felt the being grandmother Alaska come in and we did a mini session. They had a mini experience. And so I know
Mm,
the energy of it and the
mhm,
communication, and
mhm.
you don't have to be under the influence that to have the communication and the experience, but the different, like when you take it, like it locks you in. Like you don't, this Hunter S. Thompson says, you buy the ticket, you take the ride, right? Like
Yeah,
if you drink it, you're going there.
that's true.
So same thing with San Pedro. Like when we met, I got invited by our mutual friend to go
Mhm,
to the ceremony, and I was like, we were hanging out outside talking, and I said, I'm not really into that kind of thing. I'd have to be really guided and told, like, this is important for you to do for me to go do it. And the moment I said that, a hummingbird, which is one of the
mm,
symbols of ayahuasca, came in and like fluttered around in my face, and our faces like in the weirdest way, and then took off. And then I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. Huh. What am I going to do with that? And then about 45 minutes later, we're still sitting out there talking. And I go, that was really odd. And the moment I started to talk about the hummingbird again, it came back and did the exact same thing. And then I was just like, okay, sign me up. I'll be there. And so that piece of that this is something that we're interacting with completely, right? There's a
yeah,
consciousness,
that's
there's
right.
a being, just like when we're talking to our guides, like this is a guide. And when we see it with that kind of clarity versus like this is something I'm interacting with that has this ability to help me see myself more deeply or work through things or release things or
Yeah,
release trauma, absolutely, it's fantastic. And that's what it is. And it requires that level of reverence that you would when you're connecting with your own
yeah,
guidance.
yeah. So there's a I mean, I think this fits. There's a personality, there's a consciousness. There's a consciousness and a personality tied to that consciousness that comes through with the plant medicine realm.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets funny for me. Like when I'm talking to folks who have a background in psychedelics, but
Hmm.
not necessarily a background in energetics
Hmm.
and the spiritual practice and meditation, and the conversation is about animals, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the consciousness of the animals, and I telepathically communicate with the animals, just like San Pedro, just like other people may or may not with mushrooms, ayahuasca, those types of things. And they sort of look at me funny, like I'm making shit up. And these are people that I've known for more than a minute too,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
some cases. And I find myself saying, so let me understand this. The cactus has a consciousness, San Pedro. The mushrooms you like have a consciousness, but the other cactus that's on the planet, that other living being
Yeah.
doesn't. And
The
all the
one that
other
isn't talking to
mushrooms,
me at the moment.
that's right. And
Yeah.
all the other mushrooms that we eat for nutrition and sustenance. And the trees that give us oxygen and all the little critters that run around,
And the
they don't have,
crystals, like we talked about a few episodes ago.
and the crystals, right? But those things don't have consciousness. So just to summarize, only humans, that mushroom and that cactus have consciousness. Is that right? Is that what we're talking about? Is that what we're saying is true? And you can see, like a shift in recognition of, oh, that may not be true,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's not true.
And
It's
it
it's
is. It's just the
very
way our brain tries to shrink things down and make it more digestible and honor our experiences, but dishonor like you would think it would interpolate and go, well, if this is true, that there's probably something else here. But it doesn't. It interpolates the opposite way and just keeps shrinking our world, trying to bring order rather than, and that happens, right? Like, why is disclosure so hard? Like with UFOs, like it just opens up a whole expansiveness and makes us, it disrupts so many of our truths that people just keep shutting down with their brains and go, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous that there could be UFOs here. Like, really?
yeah,
But it's not ridiculous that,
right.
like, name it. And it's been proven and it's on video and.
Oh, yeah, right. I mean, I was listening to something a couple weeks ago about human senses and how much we're able to sense things, visually, audibly, and then there's other creatures who the range is way, they can hear the low tones or the high tones or the
Even like tigers, and how they emit like a tone that we can't hear, but it brings fear to us, right?
Right,
Uh,
right. It's like there are literally things that we cannot perceive,
mhm, mhm.
right? With the senses that are our go-tos.
Yeah.
Never mind the energetic sense that we have dismissed or didn't develop in favor of, you know, being maybe a little too smart for our own good in some
Mhm.
ways.
Yeah, yeah. Knowing better,
Yeah,
knowing the world that we know and letting it override the world that we don't know. And that's what our human brain does.
yeah, that logical part of our brain versus the feeling part of our person.
Yeah. And when we
So
open up
the
to a greater truth.
Yeah, right, right. And that greater truth, like if your starting point is that overly logical side of your brain, and then you allow the cactus or you allow the mushroom to come in, it's still in the context of that overly logical brain.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
It's when you move closer to the balance of there's logic and there's feel,
Mhm,
where you can pull from either one. It's a yes and, not an either
mhm,
or.
mhm.
And then you find yourself as part of it, not outside having a piece of it.
Yep, yep, yeah.
And that for me, that is the special part of talking to the animals. Is I had a guy ask me, so like, how would you describe it? I'm like, the we always find ourselves in trouble
Mhm.
when we go, there's us and there's nature. And for me, talking with the animals, it becomes this one big thing called nature. And I'm firmly in that circle. There's no separation. And that's a very different perspective of seeing any being outside going, you have the right to share the space just as much as I do. And just because I have the axe doesn't mean, because needs and all those things, I could take the tree down. But do I take it down and not acknowledge that there's something literally living and growing in that space, or just go, I'm a human, I can do whatever the fuck I want.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, in order for humans, I think to live the way that we've lived, we've had to see our consciousness as more important and higher than others. And it used to be like it wasn't that many years ago, and people still operate in that way where different humans said, my consciousness is more important than yours. You're a lesser being and I'm a higher being, and so I get what I want, and you have to pay the price for that, right? And so like this evolved a lot over the years, and the clarity has come through on that. Yet, you know, I think that that's just part of what's happening too. Is people's consciousness are waking up, they're becoming more aware of the consciousness of everything, and it's exciting. It's interesting too. This was I've always fascinated with UFOs because I've had so many experiences with them. And I remember reading this article this guy had written about studying. It was actually like an abduction case where a ship had come down and brought this couple, up into the ship, and then they had an experience and they returned them. And the author said, it was funny for when I met those people, like I thought they were completely full of it. Like I'd seen UFOs myself. I'd had documents. I've had experiences, but the idea that somebody could be taken up into a UFO and then returned, I hadn't had that experience. So to me, it was complete bullshit. And it was funny how he was able to name that and go, like when I look back on it, it's funny, but it's how our human brains work. It's going, oh, like I can believe they exist. I know they exist. I've witnessed it. I know they could, but the fact that that could happen, that's ridiculous. That's impossible. There's no way that could happen. And it's how we protect our reality. And if we need things to be a certain way, like we just keep closing down and we don't interpolate out, we interpolate down. We reduce.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And it's how our brain works. And so we have to learn to get comfortable and go, well, if this is true, what else is true? And if this is true, what else is true? But also, like the other side of that is you see all these spiritual people that break through that and then just become magical thinkers that are just like, not wanting to be in their personal responsibility, but just going, oh, well, if there's these divine beings, great. I can just, like be in la la land and not contribute to what we're doing here as humans. Um, and that isn't it either. It's this place of like, I'm also a divine being. I have divine things to do. Oh, I have a divine consciousness. I can tap into that and I can be that and I can live from that. And I can create massive uplift and change here on the planet through my consciousness because I'm a divine being too. And so like the knowing our place in the cosmos, even so to speak,
Mm,
like I think that that's so much of why this is so hard for people is we keep trying to reduce ourselves to just a third dimensional human consciousness. And when people open up into a higher consciousness, quite often they become lost in the exploration of it rather than going, oh, I'm a divine being, what's my purpose here? And to me, aligned living work is all about, I'm a divine being. What's my purpose here? How do I be that, live that, express that, do that? And that wake up call is like, it's a huge paradigm shift, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which I've been there. It is. Yeah. And it took me about 9 months for me to actively choose the lane.
Yeah. And most people do what I call the roller coaster workaround. Instead of riding that roller coaster
Mm,
of life where they, where they are in their ego and they get these, payoffs for the ego, but it also comes with a cost, and they do things that they're, not happy with, or whatever cost that is. Like then they go back into their alignment, and that's that spiritual bypassing, right? And they go, oh,
yeah.
okay, cool. I'll just be really spiritual now. But I also love all the egoic things. I love the power. I love the, whatever it is, the people following me, the people thinking that I'm whatever they think, that whatever I get off on. And so I'll leave my alignment to go be those things. And they
Yeah.
play this game of, engaging in like all the pseudo spiritual, where it's like, oh, I'm very spiritual, I'm very aligned, but I also do all these other things that feed my ego in massive
Yeah.
ways. And I pop back and forth. And there's a, like, you just go to Instagram and look at any, like, you don't have to go far to find a spiritual teacher who's, that's the game they're playing, is this, like, I have access to this, but the most important thing to me is how I look and how you perceive me, much more so
It's
than what
true.
I'm.
It's true. Yeah. You reminded me of a post I saw someplace about, it was like a health coach, and which are sort of like spirituality coaches, I think, for the most
It's
part.
the starting point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one actually had something really lovely to say. It was something like, it's not a diet, it's the right way to eat.
Love it.
Like you're just eating shit. And so it feels awful to get off that sugar and all the other things that chemically give us a reaction, and actually eat the way that we're supposed to be eating.
Beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is sort of the same thing. Like, but it's just supposed to be like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea of diet, to me, like, I'd forgotten that diet meant like eating less calories or eating things that to make you lose weight. Like I always think of diet as like what I'm choosing to eat because it's right for
Yes.
me. I remember this was several years ago. I was traveling. I think it was in going through Indiana, and stopped at Blaze Pizza and ordered a gluten-free pizza crust. And the girl behind the counter, they usually ask, is this an allergy or is this preference, because of the cross contamination? And I said, oh, it's preference. I'm, meaning I didn't really mean preference. I meant like I can't eat gluten because I'm less when I do that. I'm not as clear. It affects me. And so she goes, oh, so she said, is it for diet or is it allergy? And I said, oh, it's for diet. And she's like, well, there's actually more calories in this crust than there is in the regular crust. And I was super confused for a minute. And I was like, oh, not that kind of diet. Like what's good for me and what's not good for me, that kind of diet. What my body likes and what my body doesn't like, that kind of diet. And she just
Yeah.
couldn't wrap her head around it. It was like, you must be trying to lose weight. I'm like, do I look like I'm trying to lose weight? First
Right.
off, I'm offended by that. But secondly, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. The definition of diet is what you put in your body. It's not Atkins, or it's not
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
else. Yeah.
yeah. It was hilarious. We literally stood there and stared at each other for about 10 seconds, and then I went, oh, we're not talking about the same thing.
Which I think is a lovely cap to the conversation. Like,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
when we're talking about things, we are not necessarily talking about the same things that a lot of other people are talking about, even if the
Yeah,
language is similar.
yeah, absolutely. Like this is all about claiming yourself. Who am I? What am I here to do? I am a spiritual being. Let me be that. Let me get as in touch with that as possible, and know that I have a purpose here, and be that purpose, not just being an explorer, in the exploration of the non-ordinary, but finding myself there. Who am I here? Let me let that emerge and be that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. It's
So
cool.
yeah, really interesting conversation.
Yeah. Fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for listening, everyone. Hope that was helpful insight for you. And we will see y'all next week. We hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast. And if you did, please subscribe so you can catch the next episode. If you want to learn more about the Aligned Living System and how it could support you in your life, check out davidwaldas.com.